Salutations and welcome, horse racing fans, to the Win Place Show. I am your host, Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. I am thrilled to be doing episode 2 now of the Win Place Show. This is going to be a show we're going to have 2 times a week. And one of those is usually going to be focused on perhaps previewing races of the upcoming week or interviews with people within the horse racing industry. And then another one of the episodes will be focused more on perhaps recapping some of the information that took place the previous weekend in terms of stakes races, sometimes keeping myself accountable in terms of what I got right, what I got wrong in terms of handicapping, my capping the card episodes, etc. So a lot of information that's going to get covered between the two. But one of the things that we're always going to do on the Win Place Show is also cover the biggest news that's taking place in horse racing and across the sport and keep you up to date with that information. Some of it just rehashing some information that maybe has taken place over the last week, but also some late breaking news that might have just happened today and in previous 24 hours. So we always have a lot of information for you here on the Win Place Show. Appreciate you checking it out. And like I said, make sure to like and subscribe to Trust the Profits. Make sure to like this video, comment below with your thoughts. Really appreciate, like I said, the outpouring of support for bringing back the Win Place Show, which is something that I had done on my own as a podcast for a long time. Now bringing it back here on YouTube with Trust the Profits. Very pleased to be able to do that. So, like I said, welcome. And we have a lot to get to today. We have good news, bad news, some worse news, some okay news. We got a little bit of everything because it's horse racing. And so you can never have all one thing or all the other in this sport, it seems like. So there's always a little bit of good mixed with a little bit of bad. We're going to cover all of it and provide some analysis of what it might mean moving forward. But obviously, the big news that I wanted to start off with was something that really is going to impact the shape of the sport moving forward. And that is, of course, retirements. Retirements are something that happens more and more regularly, more and more, earlier and earlier in a horse's career now, obviously. The big news was, of course, after the Breeders' Cup, Flightline retiring after only 6 career races. I know that kind of diminishes him in the eyes of some who have a longer view of horse racing history. Certainly an understandable perspective to have. I have no qualms with people who say, he just can't get to that upper echelon, upper pantheon of horses in my eyes because he only ran in 6 races. I understand that. I do think that there's a little bit of grading on the curve in this world because, quite frankly, we just don't have horses that run 40 and 50 times at a stakes level anymore. I mean, certainly we have horses like Beverly Park. We have horses like Sir Alfred James that feel like they're out there all the time and running well. It's not, it's not as if they're being run into the ground. These are horses that are competitive, that are winning races, and that are winning some nice races as well in the case of Sir Alfred James. So we have those horses out there, but at the elite stakes level, you just don't see it much here in North America anymore. That's, of course, very unfortunate. But there's a multitude of reasons that go into that, including the amount of money that's available on the back end of this. So I wanted to start by just kind of recapping a lot of the retirements because news kind of trickled out slowly. Some of it came out right after the Breeders' Cup. Other news kind of came out a few days later, then a week later. So I figured it would just be helpful to recap where we stand in terms of retirements within horse racing right now moving forward. And so here are some notable retirements that we have. And obviously, like I said, Flightline in particular was a big name, but you'll notice that older dirt male division really took a hit. Flightline retired. Life is Good retired. Epicenter obviously broke down, hoping for the best. Seems like he'll be able to recover and then just go out to sire. So he'll obviously retire from the sport at this point. Olympiad also retiring. So you have a lot of horses here that were among the best in this division that are retiring. In fact, you could argue probably the top 4 horses probably in the division retired. Taba, Zandon, Rich Strike. Those are the horses that are kind of coming back in this division. It's not a particularly deep division. It does look like Cyberknife is going to probably come back too. Will Cody's Witch stretch out? I don't think so. That horse seems like a pure miler, so I don't think that is really a feasible alternative for Cody's Wish. So I think you're looking at maybe a little bit of a watered down field. Obviously, you still have horses like White Abario, Simplification, that are going to go down to Gulfstream, probably going to run in the Pegasus. And, you'll have those horses as well, but there's not really a big name returning this year, unfortunately. I think Zandon and Taba are probably the two biggest names. Rich Strike, obviously, that has the cachet of the former Derby winner, but and we'll see how he performs with Clark, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now, the sprint division also got hit pretty hard. Jackie's Warrior retiring. We knew that ahead of time. Aloha West, last year's Breeders' Cup winner, retiring as well from Wayne Catalano. The surprise slash not surprise is, of course, Jack Christopher, who was probably my favorite 3-year-old. I sometimes try to make an argument that he should win the 3-year-old horse of the year, but that's I know that's an uphill battle to try to convince people of that. But he's a very, very good horse, and he's someone who I just liked a lot. He's just a favorite horse of mine, and I thought the transition to making him a pure sprint horse was just going to work out great. Obviously, you saw the Jerkins performance as well up at Saratoga, so I really like Jack Christopher a lot. Obviously, the scratch the week of the Breeders' Cup. Anybody who's ever seen Jack Christopher work out will tell you when this horse trots, when this horse moves slowly, he looks like an old man. It looks like he's in either pain or discomfort or something's wrong. But everybody who's ever seen him work out says once he gets up to speed, he looks great. And that's just the way he is. He just has a little bit of a funky gait before getting up to full speed. Obviously, Chad Brown was worried about that in terms of potentially being a veterinary scratch. Chad Brown had said up and down that he had gotten Jack Christopher x-rayed and radiographed and just everything, and everything was fine. Ultimately, though, now he's going to retirement. And the lure of stud fees is probably a little bit more than you can turn down. So Jack Christopher going to retire, that's obviously a big blow to the sprint division. You still have some nice horses coming back in that division. Obviously, Elite Power, who won the Breeders' Cup this year, but you also have horses like Gunite in that division. So American Theorem, you have some horses that are nice horses. It'll be interesting to see whether or not some new names kind of pop up over the next few months within that division. It's always interesting to see what 3-year-olds or horses that are about to be 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds currently, but 3-year-olds who may try the Derby trail and realize distance is not their friend, may cut back in length. I mean, that's a little bit of what you saw with Jack Christopher. Obviously didn't go the Derby trail, but again, tried the Haskell. That wasn't going to work out, went back. Gunite, was more on the early Derby trail as a 2-year-old and then just kind of stuck to one turn as a 3-year-old. So you have some of these horses that they're going to maybe try their hands at going a little longer, cutting back then, and they're going to start to replenish this division as well at some point. But obviously a blow there. Golden Pal, to be expected, retired obviously from the turf sprint division. I don't know who we're going to be able to wake up to and watch over at Royal Ascot next year. Well, I know who we'll be able to watch. We'll be able to watch some Grand Motion horses. We'll also, Wesley Ward also will bring over. He'll take over Love Reigns. He'll take over, his fleet of turf sprinters over there. But Grand Motion's got Spenderella on ice right now. She'll come back. And I'd imagine Graham usually takes a couple of horses over to Royal Ascot as well. So there'll still be a reason for us to wake up early that time of year to watch some good British racing. And then obviously Malathat from the Distaff division retired after her victory in the Distaff and likely Eclipse Award winner. And then Regal Glory just announced that Regal Glory will run one last time at the Matriarch Stakes and then retire. So not retired yet, one last race, but will retire after the Matriarch Stakes in December. So aside from retirements, these are some mostly male horses, but obviously there was also the Keeneland sales information that popped up. And that was, I thought, particularly interesting to see what happened in the days after the Breeders' Cup, because you have all of these sales, particularly of brood mares at this point, or mares becoming brood mares at this point, who will now go out and retire in their own way and have their offspring. A couple of big takeaways from this. One, Japanese domination again at the sales ring. The Japanese may not have brought many horses over to Keeneland, but they brought their pocketbook. That's for sure. they opened up their wallet, and for the second year in a row, they were major players in buying up some of the top potential broodmares from North America and bringing them back over to Japan. Calypso, Plum Ali, Army Wife, Bella Sofia, Going to Vegas, all purchased by Japanese interests this year. And that's not even the entire list. That's just kind of the highlights of the horses that Japanese interests purchased during that Keeneland sale right after the Breeders' Cup. I mean, those are some nice names that you're adding to a pretty significant fleet now of broodmares over in Japan. Obviously, they also have their sires over there. Frenzy Fire last year was a horse that got transported back over to Japan as siring over there. So again, continue to pay attention to those Japanese interests. They may not always show up at the Breeders' Cup, but this is going to be very critical to watch how they perform in terms of either going to the Middle East in the coming years and seeing how they perform at Maidan and some of those races, how they perform when they come to Europe in some instances on the turf, some of the bigger days, whether it's the Arc, whether it's Royal Ascot, etc. And obviously keeping an eye on when they come to the United States, potentially for the Breeders' Cup. Next year, Breeders' Cup is back at Santa Anita, back in California, I should say, at Santa Anita. And I would expect a larger Japanese contingent there because the logistics are a lot easier. It's a much easier kind of overnight or flight over for these horses. So that's another one to just keep an eye on next year. But rest assured, even if you're not seeing Japanese horses in the racing form, they've been slowly building a very, very strong fleet of broodmares and a very, very strong barns over there. So again, something to keep in mind. One of the interesting pieces to come out of the Keeneland sales as well was She Dares the Devil sold for $5 million, but will remain trading according to Brad Cox. So even though she has been sold and will eventually obviously retire and, provide offspring, she is going to continue training for the time being. So She Dares the Devil will remain in circulation despite being sold for $5 million. A horse that will also get back into circulation was Pizza Bianca. Now, Pizza Bianca banged the gavel at $3.4 million, but that did not meet her reserve. So as a result, there was no sale. They expected to get more for Pizza Bianca. She did not bring that cost. I thought 3.4 million was more than fair for Pizza Bianca, if not probably a little too much based upon what she's done. But nevertheless, Bobby Flay, Christophe Clement, bringing her back, and she will continue to run next year. Seeing some of these numbers, I mentioned her already, Spenderella, who's a horse I just really, really like. She might be, now one of my favorites that's out there still running. She's such a good, classy turf filly. Like her so much, and seeing some of these prices, I just can't imagine what she's going to go for when it comes time for her to hit the sales ring as a broodmare, because she ran over at Royal Ascot and ran a really game second over there and competed against the very best in Europe. She's going to be a monster next year, I have a feeling, here in America. So she's the one to keep an eye on for next year's sales, and just next year, obviously, at the track. But obviously, big news there. So a lot of turnover. That's the big takeaway here. A lot of turnover from the different divisions in terms of the males retiring, the females, also retiring and being sold for broodmare rights and things along those lines. So always something happening in that space. Now, I mentioned not all the news that we're going to cover today is good news. And indeed, we have a rash of suspensions that have been coming out over the last 24 to 48 hours. First of all, Tom Amos, the trainer mostly based in the Midwest and Louisiana, who's also a personality on NYRA's Today at the Races, has accepted a 7-day suspension from the Indiana Horse Racing Commission after a horse that he trained tested positive for a permissible medication. Now, Amos came out on social media and got ahead of this. About 24 hours before the news broke, Amos actually went onto social media and said, tomorrow, Indiana Horse Racing is going to announce that I've been suspended. This is what happened. I take full responsibility. It was my mistake. I apologize. And, basically this won't happen again, or, I'm going to take steps to make sure this doesn't happen again, etc. It was a very well-rehearsed sort of tweet/statement that was put out by this trainer. But nevertheless, this is still a little bit of a black eye. Amos is a very, highly visible trainer because of his position working at Fox for Naira and being on air a great deal. And then obviously just being a pretty big trainer in his own right as well throughout the Midwest and particularly down in Louisiana. So that's something it's unfortunate. It's one of those things where this is a little bit like Medina Spirit in that this was a permissible medication. So I want that to be clear. This was a permissible medication that was just administered, or that the horse tested positive for having too much of that permissible medication in their system at the time of the race. So, or after the race was concluded. So that is yeah, I think there's important distinctions to be made. I've talked to different people across the industry about this over the last year or so. I've talked to vets who will say this, kind of constant slight overdosage of permissible medication does have long-term negative effects. I've talked to other people who say this really does not make any impact at all on the outcome of the race. It makes less of an impact than any sort of whip rule or anything like that. And so, there's a division within the horse racing community between people who look at that and go, oh, no big deal, versus people who look at that and kind of not freak out, but people who look at that and go, this is what's wrong with our sport. So, Amos, though, got ahead of this in a lot of ways, was good PR, was applauded by a lot of people on social media for his transparency and accountability. I'm going to circle back and talk a little bit more about that in a second, but he did a lot of things right in dealing with this suspension in terms of the public relations aspect of it. Now, someone who is dealing with a much bigger PR nightmare is Doug O'Neill, of course, the very famous trainer of Hot Rod Charlie. He is facing a 60-day suspension, 30 of which will be stayed for good cause. So he's basically facing a 30-day suspension and a $10,000 fine for the positive test on Worst Reed Sanchez from a race up at Golden Gate Park this summer in a stakes race. This was a banned substance of lidocaine. His suspension will begin next week, November 21st, and end on December 20th. O'Neill, of course, is someone who, has a reputation in the sport as being a big personality, but he's a likable guy in a lot of instances, but he also has faced his fair share of suspensions and, slap on the wrists and more than slap on the wrists over the years. And so this, another kind of black eye. O'Neill, again, a very public figure with Hot Rod Charlie. That's a very popular horse, a very popular ownership group, very popular trainer in that regard. So not great news for horse racing that two very, famous trainers within a span of about 24 hours, news comes out that they both got popped for different suspensions for different reasons. Obviously, severity is a little bit different there between the two cases, but nonetheless, not great news there. And then finally, word just came out on Wednesday afternoon from the Southern District Attorney of New York that they announced that the sentence of Luis Grasso, who's a veterinarian, equine vet, as well as Richard Bonka and Renee Allard, were all sentenced for their roles in a horse race doping scheme. Grasso, the vet, was sentenced to 50 months in prison, so a little over 4 years, while Bonka and Allard, trainers, were sentenced for basically 2.5 years, 30 months and 27 months, respectively, in prison for Bonka and Allard. They also are going to have extended probation after their sentence is over. Grasso, 2-year probation. Bonka and Allard, both 1-year probation as well. And then Grasso was also further ordered to pay restitution to the amount of $47.6 million. Now, let me tell you what's not going to happen. Lou Grasso is not going to be paying $47.6 million. That just, these sorts of restitution payments rarely ever actually come out to fruition. I'm sure there'll be a lot that's legalese done in the background in this space. But nevertheless, this news coming out, again, Amos, O'Neill, the sentencing of the horse racing doping scheme, all within a 24 to 48 hour period. Not great news. On top of that, obviously, on a more domestic side of things, Chad Brown just pled guilty to a very minor charge stemming from allegations and other charges, more serious charges this summer up at Saratoga in a domestic case that ended up being really, pled down to something extremely small that's not going to actually have any sort of an impact on his criminal record. Very small fine. Again, not a great week for horse racing trainers, between suspensions, between personal matters being in the news, between, like I said, legal issues popping up. This was not a great week for horse racing trainers, but this is the nature of the business to some extent. And this is part of why I think those of us who love horse racing so much get so frustrated with it. I want to circle back to something I said earlier with Tom Amos. Tom Amos got out ahead of this and was transparent about the upcoming suspension and held himself accountable for that suspension. People across the industry applauded Amos for doing that. And it was a perfectly good thing to do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say that he shouldn't have done that. He absolutely should have. The point that I will make is that that is the bare minimum we should expect from any public figure in the sport. And the fact that we go out of our way to applaud someone for doing the bare minimum tells you where we are as an industry. Any other sport out there, if somebody is about to get suspended for performance enhancing drugs, they are releasing a statement. Their lawyers are releasing a statement. The team they're associated is releasing a statement. Now, in some cases, they fight those things, but in a lot of cases, Fernando Tatis for the San Diego Padres, other people out there who I know Lane Johnson, who's a member of the Philadelphia Eagles, has tested positive for steroids a couple of times. Those are things that when they got popped, they came out, they released a statement, they apologized to their teammates, they apologized for letting down their team, they apologized to the organization, they took accountability, and they went away for, in some cases, a pretty prolonged period of time because of their suspensions. That's just what you do. I mean, I maybe it's because I taught political science for a long time. I study politics. This is just good PR. Like, this is just what a normal person is supposed to do when they get in trouble for something. You take accountability, you step up, you apologize, you say it won't happen again, and you take accountability for your actions. That's what you do. The fact that we are in an industry that seems allergic to that is maddening. I think for so many of us who just love horses and just love the sport. And maybe we like, maybe some of us like the betting angle more than other things, but we just want what's best for the horses. Even I would say 99.9% of bettors care deeply about the welfare of horses because they know the industry is not going to survive if they don't take care of the horses. So they're not going to have anything to bet on if the horses aren't taken care of. So even if you are a little bit more cynical and just in this for the money, there's still that connection to equine welfare and equine care. The point I'm making here is Tom Amos did the right thing, but we should demand that more of our industry leaders, more of our biggest names in the sport, do the right thing as well. This should not be so extraordinary that it requires major figures in horse racing like Ray Pollock to go out of his way to compliment someone like Tom Amos for doing what anyone should do in any other walk of life. Take accountability, apologize, and move on. That's where we are, though, as a sport. If anybody wants to hire me as a PR manager, feel free. Now, it's not all been bad news in horse racing, and I want to kind of finish on better news. And one of the pieces, the best piece of news I can share, I want to congratulate a friend of the program, a friend of Trust the Profits, a friend of mine, Jessica Paquette. Jessica started her time calling the races at Parx this week on Monday. So excited, or on Tuesday, actually, she started. It was her first day. So excited for her. Chris Griffin, of course, the longtime announcer at Parx, is going to be moving to the spring meet at Aqueduct, and he'll be announcing there. This is all part of the shakeup at NYRA to some extent. So Griffin will be going to Aqueduct. Frank Miramati will be going to Saratoga. And so you'll have this kind of musical chairs of announcers a little bit. Jessica, like I said, has come in and is going to be taking over full-time race calling duties at Parx. And just want to congratulate her on that. She is someone who I've had the pleasure to get to know pretty well because she works a lot at Colonial Downs, which is right down the road from me. I live in Northern Virginia. It's not too far away. I go down. I see her working in the paddock all the time. Obviously, she worked for 15 years at Suffolk Downs. worked at Sam Houston, worked at Colonial Downs. She's put in her time. She's a great equine advocate. She's a great horse person. She's just a great individual as well. She's somebody who cares deeply about these horses. She's got a great eye for talent in terms of paddock picks and things like that. So congratulations to Jessica for breaking some barriers, breaking some glass ceilings within the industry, and getting off to a great start there at Parx on Tuesday. And I know I enjoyed listening to the call of that first race, which was a huge bomb. I think it was a $76 winner on a $2 win bet. So that was a nice way to kick things off for her with a big upset in that particular race. Well, there's one other race that I want to kind of preview and look forward to before we end things today, because we've covered what has happened, but let's look ahead at what will happen. We got a couple of races this weekend. We got the Chaluki. We got, the Bob Hope out at Del Mar. But there's not you look at that Chaluki field, it's not that loaded. It's not that overwhelming. The next big race we have coming up is the Clark. That field is actually going to get drawn this Sunday. And it's a really intriguing field. I actually like this field quite a bit. So let's take a look at the probable field for the Clark. Got Rich Strike, Eric Reed, obviously coming off that fourth place finish in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Then you got Proxy from Michael Stidham, who is coming back to action after that third place finish in the Stephen Foster. So that's coming back from a little while ago. Proxy's going to be coming back. Then you got horses like Double Crown, who won the Kelso, Folsom, who finished second in that Fayette Stakes for Brad Cox, Injunction, who finished second to Senior Buscador at the ACAC, King Fury, the Ken McPeak horse, and then Keystone Field, who actually the Richard Mandela horse, who just won the Claiming Crown stakes at Churchill just the other day. So likely coming back here in the Clark. So that's a nice little field that you have in the Clark. Now, let's compare it to last year, though. Last year, you had Maxfield, Midnight Bourbon, and Happy Saver. Those were your top three in the Clark field last year. Again, this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of retirements. That older male division is there's just been a lot of defections, between the death of Medina Spirit, the death of Midnight Bourbon, the injury to Mo Donegal, the injury to Epicenter, early voting being retired already, Charge It being on the bench, probably coming back, it seems like. But I mean, it's just there's not a ton there right now. So the cupboard's a little bit bare. I still think this is a nice field. I mean, this feels like a very competitive race. I mean, I don't want to say this is a grade 2 or a grade 3 or a grade 1 type of field. I'm not going to necessarily put that sort of dimension on it, but I will say that's a nice field. You show me that field, I go, that's a competitive race. I'm interested in watching who wins that race. I think this is a big race for Rich Strike. If Rich Strike wins this, I think that not doesn't validate the Kentucky Derby in any way, but I think it just gives him a lot of momentum going into his 4-year-old year to really start up those potential rivalries with Zandon, with Cyberknife, with Taba. So I'm interested to see how Rich Strike performs here. Certainly, coming out after that Belmont performance, coming back with a fourth, a fourth, a second, and a fourth, basically in some big spots. And so, like I said, we'll see how he ends up performing there in the Clark field. But that's going to be a fun race to look at there. All right. Well, that's it for this week. And I appreciate you tuning in to the Win Play Show. Remember to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. Remember to subscribe to Trust the Profits. Make sure to check out all of our videos. Make sure to like this one and comment on your thoughts below. And like I said, we got a lot coming for you. We got live stream handicapping for Thursday nights at Chucktown. That's a blast. El Hombre's leading that. There's a great panel of people from all across the industry who are going to be tuning in. You got Colin with Doubling Down. You got myself with the Win Play Show. You got a lot of content for a lot of different people, whether it's horse racing news, whether it's interviews, whether it's handicapping, whether it's live streams, whether it's particular tracks, whether it's big stakes cards. We got you covered on Trust the Profits. So make sure to subscribe. All right. Well, until next time, friends, I wish you all the very best at the track, a prosperous time at the track. And remember that it's now post time.